232. It was a dope card to watch. Turned out to be better than I thought it would be, the card. I would say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I was initially just looking forward to the main event and the co-main event. And honestly, the main event, I don't know, there was something... I was looking forward to it, but I was looking more forward to the co-main event than the main event. And the main event is John Jones versus Alexander Gustafsson, Part 2. The co-main event was Chris Cyborg and Amanda Nunes. But there was a couple of surprising good fights. The other 3 fights on the main card, Chad Mendes and Alexander Volkanovski, turned out to be dope. Surprising KO finish by Alexander. And Chad Mendes, I haven't verified this myself, but a coworker of mine who's pretty into MMA and watches all these fights as well, told me that Chad Mendes has since announced his retirement. I know he's been teetering on retirement, so it's believable. And but it kind of sucks because he looked really good in his last fight, his fight before this one. But I know he's like branched off and he started like some sort of like hunting company or something like that. And you know, he's involved with he's from like Team Alpha Male, and you know, he's involved in like that gym. You know, hats off to him. He was a dope fighter. Definitely like those that are in the know, like the Brendan Schaubs and Rogans and Dana White, you know, always say that when a fighter is contemplating retirement, you know, when he's like 1 foot in, 1 foot out type of thing, they should definitely just retire. And apparently he is in that camp. So hats off to Chad Mendes. Then the Corey Anderson fight. Corey Anderson won by decision. Corey Anderson versus Ilir Latifi. And that one was an okay fight. It wasn't bad. It wasn't like anything like too special, but it wasn't like a snooze fest either. And that was pretty cool. The very impressive Michael Chiesa versus Carlos Condit fight wound up being a surprisingly dope fight to watch. Chiesa came up from 155 to 170. And 170 is definitely his weight class. Unless this is like a one-time fluke type of thing, he looked great at 170. Like, he looked like contender status at 170. Michael Chiesa, for those of you that don't know, he was most recently in the news because of that whole incident when Conor McGregor like threw the dolly at the bus that Khabib Nurmagomedov was in. Chiesa was the guy sitting next to the window who had like shards of glass like cut his eye and his face and shit like that, and he's like suing Conor for like millions, and he's that guy. Before that, he was another fighter on the roster at 155, and I don't remember if he was like an Ultimate Fighter winner or just like one of the guys on there that wound up getting a contract or what, but he wasn't, I don't know. He was a known name, but not like the standout fighter, in my opinion. But at 170, he looked awesome. You know, there doesn't have to do much of a weight cut, if at all, at 170, and he looked great. And he was going against Carlos Condit, which Carlos Condit was one of my favorite fighters at one point when he actually fought GSP for the title a few years ago. I was actually rooting for Condit and against GSP, which is one of like the greatest ever. But I don't know, I like really like Condit, and you know, a huge GSP fan as well. But I was rooting for Condit, and I remember Condit actually dropped GSP. I don't know if it was like the first or the second round, but then, you know, GSP, I don't remember if it was like Saved by the Bell or if he just like got out of it after he was like clipped and like dazed a bit. But wound up obviously winning and retaining his belt. And he is, I would say, past his prime, Carlos Condit, but definitely still a high-level fighter. And like Chiesa said in his post-fight interview, Carlos Condit is still someone that can win a fight anytime he's in there against any opponent that he has. And, he's just had a bit of a streak of losses. I don't know if it's like 3 or 5 losses or something like that. Most recently, or 4 or something. Yeah, I just looked it up. 5 losses in a row. His last win was against Thiago Alves, and that was in May of 2015. So it's been a minute. 5 losses in a row. I would say he's probably approaching retirement with that bad streak. But again, Carlos looked great like in the fight. He just got caught and submitted in the second round by Michael Chiesa. And that was a surprisingly dope fight to watch. Then the co-main event did not disappoint. And for those of you that don't know, Cris Cyborg was always spoken about as being like the most feared woman on the planet. Like, she is cock diesel. She could probably fuck up guys. They say that, she has like male sparring partners because there's no like women that like match up to her really, and that she's like accidentally knocked out a couple of them in training. I don't know how much of that is like hype and talk, just to like build her up, but it's definitely believable. She has a very, I don't want to say manly physique because I don't want to be like disrespectful in that way, but it's definitely like one of these like brolic, like cut, like bodybuilder looking ladies. And Amanda Nunes, and she's a champion, right? Obviously, she was someone that when Ronda Rousey was in her heyday, everybody wanted them to like fight, but she was too big for Ronda Rousey. And that was like Ronda's argument, always saying that, she's a champion. Why should she have to like go up to fight this this lady, Cris Cyborg, who has like so much hype behind her, blah blah blah. And everybody pretty much said that it was because Ronda was scared, but she kind of has a point too, right? Why is she gonna like gain 20 pounds to go like fight someone that is, not a champion or whatever, but she did say that she would fight Cris Cyborg if Cris Cyborg went down to 135, but she just couldn't make that weight cut. She cuts weight now to get down to 145, which is where this fight took place against Amanda Nunes, which is the 135-pound champion. And Amanda Nunes took on the challenge of going up in weight from 135 to 145 and fighting the bigger Cris Cyborg, champion versus champion. Amanda Nunes is the person that knocked out Ronda Rousey or TKO'd Ronda Rousey in her return fight. When Ronda came back after her first loss against Holly Holm, came back and she fought Amanda Nunes after Amanda Nunes also took out Holly Holm and Miesha Tate. Amanda Nunes is a dope fighter, has heavy hands, but again is going up against this most feared woman on the planet. And the way I expected this fight to go, and most of the pundits in the MMA community as well, was that Cris Cyborg was just going to run through her and knock her out or TKO her the way she does the vast majority of all her other opponents. Like, she hasn't had a loss prior to this fight. Spoiler alert. And I was definitely rooting for Amanda Nunes, but I just felt that, Cris Cyborg is such a beast that she would like go through her. But if anybody stood a chance, it would be Amanda Nunes. She is probably her most formidable opponent to date, and I was definitely rooting for her. And I was stunned, amazed, and happy when Amanda Nunes wound up going through Chris Cyborg the way everybody expected Chris Cyborg to go through Amanda Nunes. In 51 seconds of the first round, Amanda Nunes knocked Chris Cyborg out cold. She clipped her and broke it down strategically after in her post-fight interview and in the in the octagon and her post-fight interview press conference, and mapped out how their training plan which was to kick out the lead leg of Chris Cyborg and catch her with an overhand right, because she leaves her left a little bit low when she throws it. And she said it worked exactly as expected, exactly as they trained, and it's pretty dope to see that type of like planning, preparation, and execution, and having it actually work. Must be like an exhilarating, a dope feeling. And this fight, for another reason, was I was rooting for Amanda Nunes, and must have been that much more vindicating for her, because Ronda Rousey has always been like the darling of the women's MMA community, right? She's a Hall of Famer, can never take anything away from her. She built the women's MMA to what it eventually became, and women's MMA was women's MMA because of Ronda Rousey, because of the fame and excitement and everything that surrounded Ronda Rousey, and all the hype when she was like beating every single chick that she fought within seconds. They were saying that she was the Mike Tyson of women's MMA, and every opponent she had, she would armbar, and she would do it within seconds. The only one that gave her some comp was Miesha Tate, and even she got armbarred both times, I think. But she lasted like one more round than anyone else. I don't know. Whatever. She was always like the golden child of women's MMA. So after being knocked out by Holly Holm, when she got kicked in the head for her first loss, and she took this like long hiatus and kind of like went on this like sore loser like type of kick. At least that's how most people like portrayed her. She came back to fight Amanda Nunes, and the hype behind that fight was Ronda Rousey's return, and Ronda Rousey's coming back for her belt, and like all the hype and the posters and the promotion was all behind the darling Ronda Rousey. She was the one that like put asses in seats, and she was the UFC machine's prodigal daughter has returned type shit, right? But it was kind of fucked up because Amanda Nunes in that time had become the champion, had defeated Holly Holm, had defended it against Miesha Tate, or the other way around, and she was the champion, and she was getting kind of like shit on by the promotion because it was like a foregone conclusion that Ronda Rousey was going to come back and win, and the whole Holly Holm kick was a lucky kick, fluke type of thing, and she never should have lost, and et cetera, et cetera. And Amanda Nunes just fucking TKO'd her on her feet when she came back. So that was kind of like a fuck you to the promotion. And then, since then has also defended her belt once or twice, and now fought Chris Cyborg, where everybody again pit her as the underdog, and this just like solidified it for her. Like, baddest woman on the planet, Amanda Nunes beat Holly Holm, beat Miesha Tate, beat Ronda Rousey, beat Chris Cyborg. First female in MMA, UFC MMA history to be a double champ at 135 and 145. She has a dope story. She's an openly gay woman. She's her fiance or wife is also an MMA fighter. She's like a big sweetheart. She's from Brazil. And hopefully now with this victory, the UFC realizes what they have in her, and if they don't, to be honest, they have like no choice to. Then the main event, John Bones Jones versus Alexander Gustafsson. And John Jones is known as being the greatest fighter of all time. The conversation always swirled around between him and Mighty Mouse, but Mighty Mouse was a 125 pounder in the UFC. He's the one that was just traded in that historic trade to another organization, ONE FC, for Ben Askren after his loss to Henry Cejudo. But the conversation was always between them two. And, GSP's up there, Anderson Silva's up there, and like in the conversations of who was the best MMA fighter ever in history. John Jones is always like in that conversation. He is also someone that has like questionable and controversial habits outside of the octagon that include, being popped for like cocaine use, and he was in a not hit and run, but what do you call it? He was in a car accident and fled the scene, and was seen coming back. They like caught it on video, coming back and going into the car, and he removed. He had like a pipe or like a bong or some shit. He had like weed in the car or something like that, so he ran back for that and then bounced. And the accident was with a pregnant woman, and just like shit like that, he got popped for cocaine a couple times. He pissed hot, but for a very low dose of some performance enhancing drug, steroid, that was said to be so he got suspended for it also, but it was said to be so small that it wasn't like performance enhancing, like it couldn't like enhance his performance. They say that it's from like some cocaine is cut up with creatine, and this particular type of enhancement or PD that he had in his system was one that's commonly found in creatine. And they think that, since he does coke and since it was such a low, like a trace amount of the substance, that it must have been via coke use and the creatine that was used to cut it up. And then right before this fight, he wound up pissing hot again. And there's this whole conversation and research being done in the world of performance enhancing drugs and those that are responsible for doing drug testing, not just with the Nevada and California state athletic commissions, but also WADA and USADA, that are the premier drug enforcement agencies across sports. And John Jones, as his response to it happening this time has pretty much been that it's a developing thing, and he's pretty much being like the guinea pig for these scientists and drug testing organizations to figure out what the hell it is that's in his system, because it's something called a pictogram, and which is described as being like 1 grain of salt cut up 40,000 times, and that's the amount of the substance that he had in his body, which has a shelf life of like 7 years. So it's not necessarily something new that was introduced to his body. It could very well be the same thing that he had in it before, when they attributed it to like creatine that was used to chop up his coke. And it's like such a controversial ongoing thing that they, didn't call off the fight this time. They let him fight. Testing is just continuing to be done after the fact. When the news came out, Gustafsson had the option of opting out of the fight, and he chose not to. He chose to like move forward with it. And so there's kind of like this cloud over Jon Jones, even though he is still regarded as being one of the best ever, if not the best fighter ever. And it was kind of exciting to watch this fight because it was a rematch of the person that almost beat Jon Jones once. When Alexander Gustafsson and Jon Jones fought for the first time, it was a very, very razor-sharp split decision that Jon Jones wound up winning, but that every single person that watched that fight said it was a coin flip. Could have gone either way. Like, they exchanged back and forth throughout the entire fight. Gustafsson had like the first couple rounds. Jon maybe had like the third and some of the fourth, and then it was just like a close fight throughout. And then Jon like hit the gas in the fifth round, and people think that's what won over the judges, but they were both in the hospital afterwards, and they took a picture together, and they're both like completely lumped up. It was like an iconic picture after the time period of that first fight, and it was like all over online and stuff like that in the MMA community. And so it was a rematch of the person that gave Jon Jones a run for his money. And for the first fight, though, Jon admittedly was little partying like the week before, doing coke, drinking, stuff like that. Didn't take the fight seriously, and still pulled off a win. But there was always that doubt of, was it really that, or was it that Gustafsson just like has his number type of thing? And then we saw like in this fight that Jon won like handily in the third round, a TKO victory, where Jon Jones' fights, he's usually like for the first and sometimes the second round, sometimes like 1.5 rounds, he's like filling out the opponent and like getting his range down. And then after that, it's like almost as if he like downloads the other person's like movements and then like capitalizes. And he did that in this fight. And he got Gustafsson down to the ground, just like pinned his arm and just like fucked him up. Gustafsson was like, couldn't move. But yeah, it's sucks that he has like that asterisk on his name. Hopefully if he did not do any wrong, he's vindicated somehow with the testing that's ongoing and the investigations and shit. But we'll see. Time will tell with that.